The contract on the table was thicker than a family Bible. Every page meant money. Every signature line meant a way out. Caleb Foster stared at the final line pen, hovering an inch above the paper, while a room full of powerful people watched him like a lab rat. The city attorney cleared his throat. The developer drummed manicured fingers on the polished oak. Cameras from the local news station hummed quietly in the back. On the projection screen behind them was a glossy rendering of luxury condos. Underneath that, in small print, the words "former site of Northside Veterans Center." Mr. Foster, the developer, said, voice tight, "This settlement wipes out your debts and guarantees your daughter's medical coverage for life. All you have to do is agree to stop talking. No interviews, no statements, no more drama." Caleb's eyes flicked to the back row of the council chamber. His little girl Mia sat there with her worn purple inhaler clutched in one hand and a homemade Save Our Center sign in the other. Beside her, a woman in a simple navy dress hair pulled back, face calm and unreadable, watched him as if his choice mattered more than the millions on the table. Caleb lowered the pen. For a long moment, the only sound was the buzz of the fluorescent lights. Then he pushed the contract away and said very quietly, "No. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight, and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world." His name was Caleb Foster, and 6 months before that city council showdown, he was just a tired 36-year-old pushing a mop down fluorescent hospital hallways in Tulsa, Oklahoma. By day, he was daddy, and can you help me with my math? By night, he was, hey janitor, and sorry, can you get that spill in room 412? He worked the graveyard shift at St. Anthony Regional, washing away blood coffee, and the kind of grief that sticks to tile. It wasn't the life he thought he'd have when he signed up as a National Guard medic at 19. Back then, he was the guy who ran toward explosions, not toward overflowing trash cans. But life has a way of breaking proud men down into smaller jobs. His wife Hannah had died 3 years earlier after a brutal fight with leukemia. The insurance didn't cover everything. The bills came anyway. So Caleb took whatever work would keep the lights on, and the inhalers filled for their 8-year-old daughter, Mia. Mia was the reason he didn't drink, the reason he didn't punch walls, the reason he got up at 4 in the afternoon, fried 2 eggs in an old cast-iron skillet, and packed her lunch before the evening bus to her grandma's. She had Hannah's hazel eyes and his stubborn jaw, and a small pair of lungs that sometimes forgot how to behave in Oklahoma's thick summer air. Most people at the hospital never knew what he used to be. They didn't see the steady hands that once started IVs in the back of moving Humvees. They didn't hear the calm in his voice that had talked panicked soldiers back from the edge. To them, he was the guy who fixed the squeaky cartwheel and unclogged the staff bathroom when the plumbing lost the will to live. Only 2 people really saw him. Mia, who watched him like kids watch superheroes in thrift store capes. And an older charge nurse named Dolores, who'd caught him more than once gently talking a panicked patient through a breathing exercise while he just happened to be changing a trash bag. It was a sticky August night when everything started to change. The air outside felt like wet wool, and the emergency department was slammed car wreck heat stroke 2 overdoses and a construction worker who'd fallen off scaffolding and refused to admit he was scared. Caleb was wheeling a bin of soiled linens toward the service elevator when he heard it. Not the usual ER chaos. Something sharper. A man's voice, loud and angry, echoing from the admissions desk. "I don't care what your policy is," the man was shouting. "Do you know who I am?" Beside the sliding glass doors, a woman stood rigid, her hands folded around a leather portfolio pressed to her chest. She wore a simple white blouse and dark slacks, but everything about her posture screamed money and control. The admissions clerk's face was flushed. Security hadn't arrived yet. The man jabbed a finger toward the clerk, then stepped closer to the woman, crowding her space. Patients and visitors stared, some already lifting their phones to record. The automatic doors hissed open and shut behind the woman's back, a little too close, like teeth. Caleb set his linen bin's brake without even thinking. Old instincts stirred in his chest like a warning siren. There were children in the waiting room. There was a woman pinned between anger and glass. And there was a line invisible, but very real, that he could not watch this stranger cross. Caleb didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush. He simply stepped away from the linen bin and walked toward the admissions desk with the same steady, measured gait he used on hospital floors at 3 in the morning. The man, shouting late 40s, dressed in an expensive sweat-slick suit, turned on him instantly. "Hey," the man snapped. "This is none of your business." Caleb didn't flinch. He'd been yelled at by men in far worse shape, in far worse places. But the woman beside the glass doors blinked once, as if she'd just been given a moment to breathe. Sir Caleb said quietly, "You're crowding her." The man's eyes flicked to Caleb's hospital badge, then to his uniform navy scrubs shoes with worn soles, the unmistakable cart pusher look. Recognition gave way to contempt. "Oh, perfect," the man sneered. "A janitor with opinions." The admissions clerk froze. Patients stared. Someone's phone camera lifted a little higher. The woman holding the portfolio looked down, not wanting the attention. Caleb kept his eyes steady, shoulders loose, hands visible. He wasn't here to fight, just to put space where there was none. Security arrived seconds later and guided the man toward the waiting area. He shouted the whole way about lawyers, administrators, and how this dump wouldn't exist without real donors. Caleb stepped back to his linen cart and pushed it toward the service elevator. He didn't look at the woman again, didn't want her to feel like she owed him something, but his hands shook slightly on the cart handle, not from fear, from the old familiar tension of being treated as less than human in rooms where he'd once been the calmest person alive. Being dismissed because his job title didn't fit someone else's idea of usefulness. He thought it would end there. A moment, nothing more. Hospitals create hundreds of those in a week, and most dissolve as fast as they form. But that night, the fallout found him. During the shift meeting, the new facilities manager, Carter Briggs, walked in, wearing a crisp button-down and the smug grin of a man who believed he'd been promoted solely for his brilliance, rather than because the last manager retired. He was 10 years younger than Caleb, and acted 40 years older. "All right, folks," Briggs said, clapping once. "Couple notes from upstairs. Administration wants to tighten workplace boundaries. So if you're not clinical staff, stay away from clinical situations. That means no intervening." He didn't look at anyone else. His gaze locked straight on Caleb. A few co-workers shifted in their chairs. Everyone had heard about the scene at admissions. Of course they had. Hospital gossip moves faster than antibiotics. Briggs leaned back against the wall. "Your job is floors, trash, and transport support, not engaging with visitors, not speaking on behalf of staff, and definitely not approaching volatile situations. We clear." Caleb held his breath. He forced himself not to react. The humiliation tightened across his ribs like a strap. "Yes," Caleb said quietly. Briggs nodded, pleased with himself. "Good. Because administration's documenting this as a reminder, not a disciplinary action, but further boundary issues." He let the threat hang there the way bureaucrats always do when they want fear to do their work for them. After the meeting, as people filtered out, Briggs called after him. "Foster." Caleb paused. Next time you feel like playing hero, Briggs said, lowering his voice. Remember, this place isn't a battlefield. It's a business. Caleb swallowed the bitterness rising in his throat. He'd seen men die in the dirt trying to keep strangers alive. He'd held pressure on wounds while mortar fire shook the ground. If compassion didn't belong here too, then what were they doing? But he didn't say any of that. He just nodded and walked away, the mop bucket rattling behind him. The next afternoon, he picked up Mia from her grandmother's, hoping his face didn't show the exhaustion pulling at him. She ran out with her backpack, bouncing breath-wheezy from the humidity. Look. She held out a paper fan she'd made in art class, folded construction paper, scribbled with marker rainbows. It's beautiful, he said, smiling. What's it for? So you don't get sad at work anymore. The smile stuttered on his lips. Kids always know more than adults give them credit for. He buckled her into the car seat, listening to the small rasp in her breathing. Asthma always kicked up on heavy air days. He kept an inhaler in every bag, every drawer, every jacket pocket. Grandma said people weren't nice to you yesterday, Mia said softly. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. Something like that, he answered. Did it hurt your feelings? She asked. He exhaled. Maybe a little. She reached forward and rested her tiny hand on his shoulder. Then I'll be extra nice today. Something in him cracked quietly at that. His daughter shouldn't feel responsible for stitching her father back together. 2 days later, the pressure grew again. He was called into the administrative office. White walls framed inspirational posters, fake plants in plastic pots. The assistant director sat behind a desk so shiny Caleb could see his reflection in it. We've received a complaint, she said, sliding a paper across the desk. The words blurred for a moment. Staff member acted outside his role, created a disruption, may have compromised patient confidentiality, intimidating posture. Ma'am, Caleb said evenly, if you review the security footage, you'll see I only asked the gentleman to give the woman some space. The administrator smiled in that cold, administrative way. The footage does show your involvement, which is the concern. We need predictability here. No surprises. No interventions. The hospital can't carry liability for staff without training in de-escalation. Caleb blinked slowly. He had years of training in de-escalation. He could calm a room faster than a sedative drip. He'd talked a bleeding 19-year-old private out of a panic spiral while holding his artery closed with one hand. But none of that fit on his badge here. None of that mattered. We're issuing a written warning, the administrator continued. One more incident and your employment may be reviewed. He nodded once. Not because he accepted it, but because arguing would make it worse. He walked out with the paper folded tightly in his fist, the hallway lights flickering above him. It felt like someone had taken the ground he stood on and quietly sawed it in half. That evening after dinner, Mia sat at the kitchen table coloring while Caleb washed dishes. She watched him when she thought he wasn't looking. Daddy. Yeah, bug. She lowered her crayon. Are you mad at me? He dropped the dish towel. What? No, sweetheart. Why would you think that? Because you're quieter, she whispered. And you look tired in your bones. He knelt beside her chair, pulling her into his arms. I could never be mad at you. Grown-up stuff just gets heavy sometimes. She pressed her cheek against his shoulder, small and warm and trusting. In that moment, he felt the full weight of the warning letter, the meeting, the humiliation, the sense that he was being punished for refusing to let a woman be cornered by a man twice her size. Mia leaned back to look at him. You don't have to be sad, she said. You have me. And just like that, the fear crept in. Fear that the job he relied on could vanish. Fear that the insurance keeping Mia's inhalers affordable could evaporate. Fear that one choice, one decent human choice, was quietly pushing them toward disaster. A week later, the tension snapped. During another busy shift, Briggs found Caleb in a supply hallway, checking a leaking pipe. Briggs held a clipboard jaw tight. "Foster," he barked. "The admissions supervisor says you made a patient uncomfortable earlier." Caleb wiped his hands on a rag. "I asked a visitor if he needed help finding oncology." He looked lost. "Well, he filed a complaint. Said you approached him aggressively." Caleb stared. "I asked where he was headed." Briggs stepped closer. "You're becoming a problem, and frankly, this place runs smoother when certain people stick to their lane. If you can't, maybe you're not cut out for hospital work." The fluorescent light above them flickered, a slow, irregular pulse. Caleb felt his jaw lock. His heart thudded once hard. This wasn't about lanes, or boundaries, or professionalism. This was about making sure he stayed small. And then, Briggs said the thing that finally pushed the pressure to its breaking point. "Maybe if you spent less time playing savior and more time doing your actual job, we wouldn't have these issues. You're not here to help people. You're here to clean up after them." Caleb didn't move, didn't speak. But something in him went still the way water stills before a storm. Briggs looked smug, assuming silence meant defeat. He turned away. That's when a familiar sound echoed from the far end of the hallway, soft, wheezy breathing. Mia. She was standing there with Grandma, who'd brought her by to surprise him on his break. She'd heard every word. Her face, normally bright and full of unfiltered belief, was crumpled in confusion. "Daddy, why is he talking to you like that?" The air tightened. Briggs stiffened. Caleb slowly straightened his eyes, shifting from his shaken daughter to the man who had just crossed a line so deep he didn't even recognize it. The pressure had built for days, maybe for years. And now it had reached its peak the moment just before something irreversible begins. What happened next would change everything. Mia's question didn't hang in the hallway, it detonated. Her small voice, soft and breathless, with the start of an asthma flare, cut through the fluorescent-lit tension like a scalpel. Briggs froze. Caleb didn't. He stepped toward his daughter, crouching so his eyes met hers, blocking her view of the man who had just spoken down to him. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. Humidity dust from the pipe stress, any of it, could trigger a tightening he couldn't afford to ignore. "Hey, Bug," he said softly, placing a hand on her cheek. "You're okay." But she wasn't. Her chest hitched. The wheeze deepened. His pulse spiked not with anger at Briggs, but with the cold, focused terror every parent of a sick child knows too well. He reached into her backpack, searching for the inhaler. Nothing. He checked Grandma's purse. Nothing. The color drained from the older woman's face. "It must be on the kitchen counter," she whispered. We rushed out, and a harsh cough tore out of Mia, bending her small body forward. And suddenly the entire corridor shifted into a different kind of emergency. Briggs stepped back a little, as if Mia's distress were inconvenient. "We can call pediatrics," he muttered, already annoyed with the disruption. "They'll send someone." Caleb didn't even look at him. "Pediatrics is on the other side of the hospital. She doesn't have that long." He scooped Mia into his arms. Her hands clutched his shirt collar as she rasped, barely pulling air. Her ribs trembled with each breath. "Stay with me, sweetheart," he murmured, rubbing her back in tight circles. Briggs stepped forward again, hands raised as if to assert authority. Foster, you can't run with a pediatric patient. You don't have clearance to. Caleb turned slowly. I'm not asking. Something in his voice made even Briggs fall silent. Caleb pivoted toward the stairwell. It was faster than elevators during emergencies. He knew every shortcut, every bypass door, every maintenance route that cut travel time by half. He'd mapped them long before tonight because that's what medics do, plan for the worst before the worst arrives. He pushed the stairwell door with his shoulder and began descending rapidly, cradling Mia with one arm. Her breaths were high-pitched, wheezy whistles. Her fingers were cold. Each step echoed the memory he never let himself linger on Hannah's final night. Her breaths too shallow, her skin too pale, his helplessness too total. Not tonight. Not again. He took the stairs 2 at a time. Grandma trailed behind, trying to keep pace. Halfway down, they met a gurney team heading upward, blocking the narrow landing. We've got a stroke code, the nurse shouted. Move, please, child in distress, Caleb called back. They tried to shift aside, but the corridor was too tight. No room. No time. Caleb adjusted his grip on Mia, tightened his core, and climbed onto the outer ledge of the stair rail. Grandma gasped. Even the code team froze. It was barely 12 inches wide, just enough for a man who had once crossed beams in half-collapsed buildings overseas. He moved sideways, boots gripping the outer ridge body, shielding his daughter from any slip. One misstep, and they'd fall almost a full flight. But he didn't. He cleared the gurney team in seconds. When his boots hit the landing, the nurse called after him. Sir, you trained before, didn't you? He didn't answer. He was already running. At the second-floor landing, the stairway door wouldn't open. A keypad lock. Restricted access. Briggs' voice echoed in his memory. Certain people need to stick to their lane. Caleb kicked once, hard. The latch gave. They burst through into a supply corridor leading to respiratory care. Mia's lips were tinged blue now. Her eyes watery, unfocused. He felt the dread rise like a tide. Not again. Not again. He stormed into the respiratory unit. A receptionist leapt from her seat. Sir, you can't just… She's crashing, he said sharply. She needs a rescue dose. A respiratory therapist spotted them from down the hallway. Get them into treatment too, she shouted. Caleb laid Mia on the bed, one hand under her back, as though the mattress wasn't soft enough to hold her. Her breaths were now sharp, panicked swallows of air. The therapist worked fast mask nebulizer medication, drawn with steady hands. Another nurse hooked up monitors. Caleb kept his hand on Mia's chest, feeling every trembling inhale. Her tiny fingers clutched his. Daddy, she whispered. Her voice sounded like sandpaper. I'm here, he said. And he was. Every second. Every breath. When the mask went on, she fought it, the instinctive panic of a child suffocating. He leaned close. Bug, listen. Remember when Mommy taught you to blow bubbles in the bathtub, slow, steady, just like that? You can do it. Her lashes fluttered. She nodded weakly. She drew in a trembling breath through the mask. Then another. The medication began its slow, essential work. The respiratory therapist looked up at him. Good call bringing her straight here. If you'd waited for pediatrics. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Caleb closed his eyes for 1 second. Just one feeling relief break over him so hard it nearly buckled his knees. When he opened them, Mia's breathing had begun to deepen. The tightness eased. Color crept back into her cheeks like dawn through blinds. He exhaled shakily. She was okay. She was okay. For now. The aftermath unfolded quickly. Security arrived, first confusion on their faces. A hospital supervisor followed, asking questions Caleb barely heard. But what he didn't expect, the sight that made him straighten instinctively, was the woman with the portfolio from the admissions incident stepping into the treatment room doorway. She wasn't wearing her pristine blouse today. She had on a simple cardigan, hair loose over her shoulders, as though she'd rushed here from somewhere she didn't want to be. She froze when she saw him, when she saw Mia, when she saw the monitors. Her eyes softened instantly. "Is she all right?" Caleb blinked. "How did you— I was here meeting with the hospital foundation," she said, stepping closer. A staffer mentioned a little girl being rushed to respiratory by a man who crossed a stair rail like it was a sidewalk. "I had a feeling." Her voice carried a controlled emotion he recognized, concern buried beneath composure. People who've lived too long in rooms where feelings weren't allowed often sounded that way. The respiratory therapist glanced between them. "You must be family." "No," the woman said quickly, then added softly, "just someone who recognizes bravery when she sees it." Caleb looked down at Mia, then back at the woman. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said gently. "They wouldn't have." Behind her, Briggs appeared, face-flushed, sweat blooming through his shirt collar. He looked caught between anger and panic. "Foster," he snapped. "You broke protocol, violated access restrictions, and put this hospital at stop." The woman's voice cracked through the air like frost. Everyone turned. She stepped fully into the room now, her presence suddenly larger, sharper. "I witnessed how he handled a dangerous situation days ago," she said. "And I just watched him save his daughter's life because he knew what to do faster than any of you did. If you're planning to reprimand him, I suggest reconsidering for your sake." Briggs gaped. "Ma'am, you have no authority here." She reached into her bag and pulled out a hospital ID badge foundation, level the highest non-clinical clearance, the kind issued only to major donors or board advisors. "My name is Carolyn Hale," she said, "and the Hale Foundation funds the respiratory expansion you're standing in." Silence crashed over the room. Briggs swallowed hard. Security straightened. The therapist's eyebrows shot up. But Caroline wasn't looking at them. She was looking at Caleb. "Your daughter is safe because you refuse to let fear or policy stop you," she said. "That's what real guardians do, and it's what this hospital desperately lacks." Caleb felt the words settle over him, unexpected, undeserved grounding. Briggs opened his mouth again. I didn't know." "No," Caroline said firmly. "You didn't. That's the problem." Mia stirred slightly, pulling the mask away for a moment. Her voice was drowsy but clear. "Daddy, did you save me?" Caleb squeezed her hand. "I just got you where you needed to be, Bug." She leaned her head against his arm. "You were fast, like a superhero." A soft sound escaped Caroline, something between a laugh and a breath. There was admiration in it, and gratitude, and maybe something he couldn't quite name yet. Security exchanged glances. Briggs looked defeated. The power dynamic of the entire hallway had shifted in a single, undeniable moment. Caleb didn't look triumphant, just relieved, exhausted, holding his daughter like the whole world lived in her heartbeat. Caroline stepped closer, her voice quiet now. "I'd like to talk to you when she's stabilized," she said. "There's something you deserve to know, and an offer I think you should hear." Part 3. Closed on a room full of witnesses, some humbled, some stunned, one furious, and a single undeniable truth, Caleb Foster had revealed who he truly was. A protector. A man of skill and courage. A father who could not, would not fail when it mattered most. And the world around him would never look at him the same way again. The treatment room settled into a shaken quiet once Mia's breathing steadied and the rescue nebulizer did its job. Monitors beeped in calmer rhythms. The fluorescent lights hummed. A few staff members lingered in the doorway pretending to check charts when really they were watching him. Caleb could feel their eyes, the kind that recalculated everything they thought they knew. Not the janitor who changed trash liners, not the quiet floor guy who worked the late shift. Someone else. Someone they hadn't bothered to see before today. Mia, still drowsy but safe, clutched his sleeve with the soft stubbornness of a child terrified a moment ago, but now drifting toward sleep. He brushed a curl from her forehead and let his hand stay there longer than necessary. Carolyn Hale stood nearby, arms crossed, not defensively, but as if she were holding in 100 thoughts at once. Every bit of her posture had shifted since the hallway. Sharper, more intentional, like someone who'd just recognized a piece of a puzzle she'd missed the first time. The respiratory therapist murmured, "We'll keep her under observation a few hours. She's going to be all right." Caleb nodded. His voice wouldn't have worked even if he'd tried. Relief had hollowed him out in the best and worst ways. A few more staff members stepped in, thanking him quietly. Even the supervisor who'd chastised him earlier managed a stiff nod. Briggs lingered behind them, pale as printer paper. His eyes darted between Caleb and Caroline, searching for a foothold he no longer had. "Mr. Foster," he said finally, trying for authority, but landing somewhere closer to nervous apology. I didn't realize." Caroline raised a hand without looking at him. "Not now." He stepped back like she'd slapped him. Caleb inhaled deeply, letting the moment settle. Caroline approached him slowly, almost cautiously. "You said she didn't have long. You weren't exaggerating, were you?" "No," Caleb answered. It was closing fast. She nodded once, her expression tightening with something that wasn't just concern. It was recognition. A knowing that comes from experience. "Caleb, can we talk somewhere private?" He glanced at Mia. "I'm not leaving her. You don't have to." She gestured to the chairs near the wall. "Just over here." He carried his daughter monitors and tubing still attached gently to a reclining chair. She curled into him like a kitten mask, humming softly against her face. He held her close, always aware of her breathing. Caroline sat in the chair across from him, resting her leather portfolio on her knees. Her hands clasped around it tightly, as if grounding herself. "You saved my life the other night," she began quietly. "And today, you saved hers." He shook his head. "No," she said firmly. "You acted when no one else did. That isn't luck or instinct. That's training." Her gaze deepened, and then she said the words that caught him completely off guard. "You were military medical, weren't you?" His pulse faltered. "Nobody here knows that." Her voice softened. "I do." She opened the portfolio and slid out a thin stack of documents, each page precisely tabbed. She didn't hand them to him. She flipped to the second sheet and laid it where he could see. His name, his service dates, his commendations. A unit patch he hadn't worn in over a decade. Every muscle in his body locked for a moment. I sponsor a program that helps former medics transition into civilian healthcare," she said. "After the incident at admissions, I had a strange feeling. You were too calm, too steady. You moved like someone who's seen real danger and learned to function through it." She paused. "I asked one of the program directors to check the public access registry. That's all this is. Nothing confidential, just enough to tell me I wasn't imagining it." Caleb looked away, jaw tight. I didn't want that part of my life following me here. Caroline nodded slowly. I know what it's like to keep pieces of your past locked away because showing them feels dangerous. He didn't expect that, and he looked at her for the first time since sitting down, not at her clothes, or her authority, or the polished confidence she wore like armor. He looked at her eyes. They carried stories she hadn't told yet. She drew a slow breath. Caleb, the girl you saved. She isn't the only one who owes you. He frowned slightly. I didn't do anything for you. You did, she said. That night at admissions, you stepped in before things escalated. I've experienced more than people know, and you gave me space to breathe, that night space I haven't felt in years. The meaning behind her words wasn't lost on him. She didn't owe details for him to understand someone in her past had cornered her. Someone had taken advantage of their power. She'd learned to live where danger wore polished shoes and knew your middle name. But the revelation wasn't over. Not even close. In a measured tone, she continued, I'm not just a donor. I'm the chair of the Hale Foundation. We fund community clinics, emergency training programs, wildfire response units. Places that need real experience, not just credentials. His brow tightened. Why are you telling me this? Her voice thinned, carrying something fragile and earnest. Because when I watched you with your daughter, when I watched that whole hallway freeze and you didn't, I realized something. What, that this hospital has you mopping floors when you should be leading crisis response teams? He blinked. Twice. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. My foundation is opening a new emergency outreach center downtown, a place that trains civilians, supports paramedics, and deploys to high-risk public events. It needs someone who knows how to keep a cool head when everything is breaking, someone who chooses courage without thinking of themselves. Caleb stared at her, unsure he'd heard correctly. I want you to come work for me, she said. I want you to lead the emergency readiness division. Briggs made a small choking sound from the doorway. No one acknowledged him. Caleb's throat tightened. I'm a maintenance tech. No, she said gently. You're a medic with field experience most doctors here don't possess. You're a father who ran a stair rail to save his child. You're a man who doesn't wait for permission to protect people. The words hit him harder than any reprimand ever had, because part of him, some buried shard beneath years of exhaustion and quiet grief, recognized the truth in them. But another part recoiled in disbelief. I don't have current certifications. My training's old. I haven't been in the field since your wife died, she finished softly. You left that world to take care of your daughter, and you did the right thing. His breath caught. He hadn't said anything about Hannah, but then he remembered the registry included dependent information. It wasn't invasive, just factual. Caroline lifted the portfolio again. I found one more thing while looking through the registry. She pulled out a faded, folded document. A commendation he hadn't thought about in years. It was a citation for pulling 2 injured civilians out of a collapsed building during a deployment disaster response operation. You never told anyone here, she said quietly. You let them think you were just the janitor. He closed his eyes. Not out of shame, out of old grief he hadn't touched in years. Mia shifted in his arms, whispering, Daddy. He kissed the top of her head. I'm right here, Bug. When he looked back at Caroline, her expression was soft, but unwavering. People here underestimated you because they never looked beyond the badge on your shirt, she said. I won't make that mistake. Briggs stepped forward, face mottled with fear and embarrassment. Mr. Foster, I didn't know your background. If I had, you would have treated him with respect. Caroline cut in. Respect shouldn't require a resume. Briggs opened his mouth again, then shut it. His authority evaporated in real time. The power dynamic had flipped so completely, the air felt different. A nurse who'd once scolded Caleb for using the wrong supply door touched his arm now. "If you ever need anything, or if Mia does, please let us know." A young tech nodded. "You kept your cool better than half our residents." Word spread through the unit in soft ripples. Not gossip. Recognition. Regret. Admiration. Caroline stood slowly, smoothing her cardigan. "When Mia is discharged, come to my office. We'll talk details. Training pathways, certifications, scheduling. I'll make it work around your daughter's needs." Caleb exhaled, stunned. "This is a lot." "Yes," she said simply. "It is." She paused at the doorway and added with quiet gravity, "But you earned it long before today." Then she left her heels clicking softly down the hall. Caleb sat there holding his sleeping daughter, surrounded by a room full of people who finally saw him clearly. Not as a mop pusher, not as a background character in a hospital's daily chaos, as someone who mattered, as someone who had stepped into chaos and walked out with a child's breath restored. And now he faced a decision he never expected, one that would change the course of his and Mia's life forever. Morning sunlight was sliding through the blinds when Mia was cleared to go home. She was groggy, but smiling legs wrapped around Caleb's waist as he carried her through the respiratory wing. The same nurses who once barely noticed him now stopped to say goodbye, offering small toys, stickers, and soft words of, "She's lucky you were here, and you did good, Dad." Even the supervisor who had handed him the warning letter stepped out of her office as they passed. "I reviewed the incident," she said, hands folded tight. "It's clear your actions saved valuable minutes. I'm sorry for how things were handled before." She didn't try to dress it up. No excuses, just a simple apology, a rare currency in places built on protocol. Caleb accepted it with a nod. He wasn't a man who held grudges. He held moments, lessons. And this moment mattered. Briggs kept to the far end of the hallway, pretending to read a clipboard he held upside down. He didn't approach. He didn't need to. His silence said what his pride wouldn't let him. He'd been wrong about the janitor, who wasn't just a janitor. By the time Caleb signed the last discharge form, it was clear the ground had shifted beneath the hospital's feet. Doors that once stayed closed were open now. People who once passed him without a glance now stepped aside with respect or gratitude. But the biggest shift waited outside. Caroline Hale stood by the visitor's entrance, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate, one with extra marshmallows, as if she'd known Mia would be craving it after a long night. When Mia reached for the smaller cup, Caroline knelt to her height. "You scared us yesterday," she said softly. "But you were so brave." Mia smiled shyly before hiding her face in Caleb's shirt. It was the kind of trust she didn't hand out easily. Yet Caroline earned it without asking. As they crossed the parking lot, Caroline walked beside them, not in front, not behind. Just beside. Like someone who understood that the best way to respect another person's strength was to walk at their pace. She didn't press him for an answer about the job. She simply said, "Whenever you're ready to talk, I'll be there." He nodded, not committing, but not closing the door either. For the first time in years, possibility didn't feel dangerous. It felt like a sunrise after too many nights. 3 weeks later, the echo of that sunrise was everywhere. The Hale Emergency Readiness Center opened downtown in a renovated brick building that used to house a newspaper press. Now its walls held classrooms for crisis training, a communications hub, and a response fleet ready to deploy for fires, storms, and community emergencies. And on the second floor, in a modest office overlooking a mural-painted alley, Caleb Foster sat behind a desk with his name on it: Director of Community Response Operations. The title still felt unreal some mornings. He'd gone through the recertification course, sharpening skills he thought he'd buried. But the real test came on his first drill, with volunteers, EMTs, and police observers watching. He led the exercise like he'd been born for it. Calm, precise, every step intentional. Afterward, one of the paramedics pulled him aside and said, "It's good to have someone who's been in the real stuff up front." Caleb just nodded. He wasn't used to praise, but he was learning how to receive it. Mia adjusted better than anyone. She'd visit after school, coloring at a kid-sized table in the corner of his office while he wrapped up paperwork. Her breathing had steadied since the episode thanks to new specialists Caroline helped him connect with, and she'd taken to telling anyone who asked that her dad worked with heroes now. Caleb always corrected her. No, he'd say, "I just help them stay ready." But inside he cherished every word. One afternoon, as the team finished a staff briefing, Caroline stepped into the room with her usual blend of confidence and quiet care. She handed Caleb a folder, project proposals, nothing dramatic, and lingered a moment longer than necessary. "You settling in?" she asked. He gave her a small smile. "I am." She nodded, satisfied. And yet he sensed she had more to say. "You know," she said, voice soft, "most people don't realize how much strength it takes to start over, to rewrite the story you thought you were stuck in." He met her eyes. "I'm not doing it alone." Something warm passed between them then, not romantic, not rushed, but human. Two people who had walked through storms and learned to recognize shelter when they found it. Before she left, she paused at the doorway. "For what it's worth," she said, "your daughter is watching every move you make. And she is learning that courage is something ordinary people carry quietly." Even in janitor scrubs, Caleb swallowed hard. He didn't trust himself to speak, so he nodded, letting gratitude sit where words would fail. Months later, the center hosted an open house event drawing families, first responders, and city officials. Caleb stood near the entrance, a clipboard in hand, watching Mia help a firefighter demonstrate basic safety gear. Her laughter filled the room the way sunlight fills windows, bright, effortless, contagious. Caroline joined him at his side, coffee in hand. "You built something good here," she said. He looked around, not at the equipment or the charts or the turnout, but at the people. The volunteers, the kids trying CPR mannequins, the families signing up for preparedness classes, his daughter teaching another child how to slow their breathing the way he'd taught her. "No," he said quietly. "We built it." For a long moment, Carolyn watched the room with a softness that made her seem almost weightless. "This," she said, "is what happens when the right people finally get seen." Caleb exhaled, feeling the truth of it settle deep. He thought of the mop bucket he'd pushed down long, lonely hallways. He thought of the warning letter still tucked in a drawer, not out of bitterness, but as a reminder of where he'd started. He thought of Mia, breathing easy, running free. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," he said. And he meant it. Caroline smiled. "Then let's keep going." As evening settled over the city, lights flickered on across the center, warm, inviting, steady. A beacon built not from wealth or position, but from a single moment in a hospital hallway when a father refused to let fear stop him. Because sometimes the most heroic thing a person can do is simply step forward when everyone else steps back. Sometimes the courage that saves a stranger becomes the courage that saves a life. And sometimes the quietest man in the room turns out to be the one holding the whole world together. In the end, Caleb learned that heroism isn't a title. It's a choice, one made again and again, especially when little eyes are watching.